On November 13, 1887, Elizabeth Crawford clutched her newborn son to her chest and whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for the safe delivery, but because she was still alive. For the first time in 3 years, a woman in Millbrook had survived childbirth under the care of Prudence Holloway, the town's only midwife. What Elizabeth didn't know was that her survival was not a miracle, but a mistake. Prudence had intended to kill both mother and child that night, but the unexpected arrival of Elizabeth's husband had interrupted the ritual that had claimed the lives of 37 women and 42 infants since Prudence had begun practicing her deadly craft in 1885. This is the macabre history of Prudence Holloway, the midwife who transformed the sacred act of bringing life into the world into a systematic harvest of death. She didn't kill for money, revenge, or madness. She killed because she believed that infant blood possessed mystical properties that could grant her eternal youth and supernatural power. For nearly a decade, she used her position of absolute trust to murder the most vulnerable members of society, while their families thanked her for her dedicated service to the community. What you're about to hear will forever change how you view the relationship between healer and patient, and reveal how one woman's obsession with immortality turned every birth in Millbrook into a potential funeral. Prudence Holloway arrived in the small Massachusetts town of Millbrook in the spring of 1885, carrying impeccable credentials from the Boston Lying-In Hospital and letters of recommendation from some of the most respected physicians in New England. At age 35, she appeared to be the answer to the community's desperate need for professional medical care, particularly for the women who face the dangers of childbirth in an era when maternal mortality rates remained frighteningly high. The town of Millbrook, with a population of just over 2,000 residents, had been without a trained midwife for more than a year following the death of old Martha Sinclair, whose traditional methods and folk remedies had served the community for decades. The arrival of Prudence, with her modern training and sophisticated medical knowledge, was greeted with enthusiasm by families who had been forced to rely on untrained neighbors or dangerous self-delivery during the most critical moments of childbirth. Prudence established her practice in a large colonial house on Elm Street, which she had purchased with what she claimed was an inheritance from her deceased parents. The house was ideally situated for her medical practice, featuring multiple bedrooms that could accommodate women during extended labor, a fully equipped delivery room with the latest medical instruments, and a private wing where she could conduct her personal research into what she described as advanced obstetric techniques. The transformation of Prudence from respected medical practitioner to systematic killer began with her gradual adoption of beliefs and practices that blended legitimate medical knowledge with occult theories about the mystical properties of human blood. Her private journals, discovered after her eventual capture, revealed an obsession with achieving immortality through the consumption of infant blood that she believed contained the purest life force available in human beings. The philosophical foundation for Prudence's crimes was based on her study of various occult texts and alchemical treatises that portrayed human blood as the key to extending life and gaining supernatural powers. She had become convinced that infant blood, obtained from newborns during their first moments of life, possessed concentrated vital essence that could transfer youth and magical abilities to those who consumed it properly. The medical knowledge that Prudence had acquired during her legitimate training provided her with the expertise necessary to kill mothers and infants, while making their deaths appear to result from natural complications of childbirth. Her understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the normal dangers associated with delivery enabled her to induce fatal conditions that would not arouse suspicion from grieving families or local authorities. The social dynamics of Millbrook's medical care system provided Prudence with nearly unlimited access to vulnerable victims while shielding her from suspicion or investigation. As the town's only trained midwife, she was called upon to assist with virtually every birth in the community, giving her opportunities to select victims based on her occult criteria while maintaining her reputation as a dedicated medical professional. The victim selection process employed by Prudence was based on a combination of practical considerations about the likelihood of detection and mystical beliefs about the quality of blood that different types of infants would provide. She preferred to target first births, believing that the blood of firstborn children contained the highest concentration of life force, while also recognizing that inexperienced mothers were less likely to detect signs of deliberate harm during the confusion of labor and delivery. The killing methods developed by Prudence were sophisticated applications of her medical knowledge designed to cause death while creating symptoms that appeared consistent with natural childbirth complications. For infants, she employed techniques including deliberate asphyxiation during delivery, the introduction of air bubbles into blood vessels, and the administration of toxic substances that would cause rapid organ failure. The murder of mothers required more complex planning, as their deaths needed to appear consistent with the various conditions that commonly claimed women's lives during childbirth. Prudence developed expertise in inducing hemorrhages, infections, and cardiac complications that would kill mothers while providing plausible explanations for their deaths that would not trigger medical investigations. The blood collection and consumption rituals performed by Prudence represented the core motivation for her systematic murders. She had developed elaborate ceremonies for draining and preserving infant blood, which she consumed according to precise schedules that she believed would maximize its life-extending properties, while also providing her with supernatural abilities, including enhanced strength, improved health, and the power to influence other people's thoughts and actions. The preservation techniques employed by Prudence for storing collected blood involved methods adapted from both medical and alchemical traditions. She maintained a hidden laboratory in her basement where infant blood was processed using various chemical treatments, distillation procedures, and mystical preparations that she believed would concentrate its vital essence while preventing deterioration. The consumption rituals performed by Prudence followed elaborate protocols that combined medical procedures with occult ceremonies designed to maximize the transfer of life force from her victims to herself. These rituals were conducted in secret chambers beneath her house and involved the use of specialized equipment, mystical symbols, and incantations that she believed were necessary for proper absorption of the blood's vital properties. The psychological transformation that accompanied Prudence's transition from legitimate medical practitioner to systematic killer involved the gradual abandonment of normal ethical constraints in favor of a worldview that justified murder as necessary for achieving transcendent goals. Her journals documented her growing belief that she was destined for immortality and that the lives of ordinary people were acceptable sacrifices for her greater purpose. The rationalization system developed by Prudence enabled her to maintain her professional identity while committing systematic murder by viewing her victims as voluntary contributions to a higher cause rather than as innocent people whose lives were being destroyed for her personal benefit. She convinced herself that mothers and infants who died under her care were participating in mystical processes that gave meaning to their deaths while advancing human understanding of life's deepest mysteries. The community relationships maintained by Prudence required sophisticated social manipulation skills that enabled her to present herself as a compassionate healer while secretly viewing her patients as sources of the blood she needed for her immortality rituals. She learned to express appropriate grief and sympathy when patients died, while privately celebrating successful harvests of vital essence. The professional reputation cultivated by Prudence was based on her genuine medical competence, combined with careful management of her patient outcomes, to maintain acceptable mortality rates that would not arouse suspicion while still providing sufficient victims for her blood collection needs. She allowed many births to proceed normally to establish her credibility, while selecting specific cases for murder based on her mystical requirements. The first confirmed victim of Prudence's systematic killing was Sarah Mitchell, a 22-year-old schoolteacher, who died during the delivery of her first child on August 15, 1885. Sarah's death was attributed to postpartum hemorrhage, a common cause of maternal mortality, that provided perfect cover for Prudence's murder, while also allowing her to collect substantial quantities of blood from both mother and infant. The murder of Sarah Mitchell established the pattern that Prudence would follow for dozens of subsequent victims. The death appeared to result from natural complications that were unfortunately common during childbirth, while the infant's simultaneous death was explained as a consequence of the mother's medical crisis. The grieving family was grateful for Prudence's efforts to save both lives and praised her dedication despite the tragic outcome. The blood collection procedures performed during Sarah Mitchell's murder were documented in detail in Prudence's private journals, revealing the systematic approach she employed for draining victims while maintaining the appearance of attempting to save their lives. The procedures involved the use of medical equipment and techniques that enabled efficient blood collection while creating evidence consistent with desperate attempts at medical intervention. The consumption ceremony conducted by Prudence following Sarah Mitchell's murder marked the beginning of her systematic practice of ritual blood drinking designed to achieve immortality. The ceremony involved elaborate preparations, mystical incantations, and consumption protocols that she believed were necessary for proper absorption of the blood's life-extending properties. The psychological impact of committing her first deliberate murders provided Prudence with confirmation that her occult theories were correct and that she was indeed destined for immortality through the consumption of infant blood. The successful completion of the murders without detection convinced her that she possessed supernatural protection and that her mission was divinely sanctioned. The expansion of Prudence's killing operation during the fall and winter of 1885 reflected her growing confidence in her murder techniques and her increasing appetite for the blood she believed was extending her life and enhancing her supernatural abilities. The frequency of suspicious deaths during childbirth increased gradually to avoid creating obvious patterns that might alert community members to deliberate malice. The victim selection criteria employed by Prudence became increasingly sophisticated as she gained experience in identifying optimal targets for her blood collection needs. She developed elaborate evaluation systems for assessing potential victims based on factors including their health, age, family background, and social connections that might influence the level of scrutiny their deaths would receive. The seasonal patterns of Prudence's murders reflected both practical considerations about community travel and social activities that might affect her ability to commit crimes undetected, and mystical beliefs about times when blood possessed enhanced vital properties. She preferred to conduct major blood collection ceremonies during new moon periods and certain calendar dates that her occult studies indicated were optimal for transferring life force. The expansion of Prudence's mystical practices beyond simple blood consumption included experiments with various alchemical preparations designed to enhance the life-extending properties of infant blood through combination with other substances, including herbs, minerals, and chemical compounds, that her studies suggested could amplify vital essence. The laboratory facilities developed by Prudence for processing collected blood represented one of the most sophisticated occult operations discovered in 19th century America. The underground chambers beneath her house contained distillation equipment, preservation systems, and ritual spaces that enabled complex preparations of blood-based substances according to precise alchemical formulas. The documentation system maintained by Prudence included detailed records of each murder, blood collection procedures, ritual preparations, and observed effects of consumption that she believed would enable her to refine her techniques while also providing evidence of her progress toward immortality. These records would later prove crucial in establishing the extent of her crimes. The psychological evolution of Prudence during her first year of systematic killing revealed a woman whose initial reluctance and moral qualms were gradually replaced by enthusiastic embrace of murder as a necessary component of her quest for eternal life. Her journal entries documented her growing excitement about the power she believed she was gaining through blood consumption. The social manipulation techniques employed by Prudence to maintain community trust while committing systematic murder included carefully crafted expressions of grief and sympathy when patients died, along with professional explanations for the medical complications that had allegedly caused their deaths. Her ability to appear genuinely distressed by patient deaths provided perfect cover for her criminal activities. The community impact of Prudence's early murders was initially viewed as unfortunate but natural consequences of the dangers associated with childbirth in the 1880s. The medical explanations provided by Prudence for patient deaths were accepted without question by families who lacked the medical knowledge necessary to recognize signs of deliberate harm. The reputation enhancement strategies employed by Prudence included occasional genuine medical successes that demonstrated her legitimate skills, while also serving as cover for the murders she committed when blood collection opportunities presented themselves. This mixed pattern of outcomes created credibility that protected her from suspicion. The winter of 1886 brought increased opportunities for Prudence to expand her killing operation, as harsh weather conditions isolated the community and reduced the likelihood that unusual activities at her house would be observed by neighbors or casual visitors. The seasonal isolation also provided optimal conditions for conducting blood collection rituals without fear of detection. The expansion of Prudence's victim categories during 1886 included targeting mothers, whose deaths would provide opportunities to claim custody of surviving infants for extended blood collection procedures. These arrangements were presented to grieving families as charitable offers to care for orphaned children, while actually serving Prudence's need for ongoing sources of infant blood. The childcare operations conducted by Prudence provided her with access to infant victims over extended periods, enabling systematic blood collection through techniques including regular bleeding procedures disguised as medical treatments. The infants in her care typically survived for several months before dying from conditions that appeared to result from various childhood diseases. The medical cover stories developed by Prudence for explaining the deaths of infants in her care included various diseases and conditions that commonly affected young children in the 1880s. Her medical knowledge enabled her to induce symptoms that would support these explanations while concealing the blood loss that was actually causing the children's deaths. The community response to the unusual number of infant deaths under Prudence's care was generally sympathetic, as residents attributed the deaths to the challenging conditions of caring for orphaned children who had been traumatized by the loss of their mothers. Prudence's apparent dedication to caring for these vulnerable infants enhanced her reputation rather than arousing suspicion about her motives. The blood processing techniques developed by Prudence during 1886 included sophisticated methods for separating and purifying different components of infant blood based on her beliefs about which elements contained the highest concentrations of vital essence. These techniques involved both medical procedures and alchemical processes that she believed would enhance the life-extending properties of the blood. The consumption protocols employed by Prudence were based on complex scheduling systems designed to maximize the absorption of vital essence while also coordinating with astrological and mystical timing that she believed influenced the effectiveness of blood-based immortality treatments. These protocols required careful planning and precise execution to achieve optimal results. The supernatural abilities that Prudence believed she was gaining through blood consumption included enhanced physical strength, improved health and vitality, slowed aging processes, and various psychic powers, including the ability to influence other people's thoughts and emotions. Her journal entries documented numerous examples of what she interpreted as evidence of these developing abilities. The physical changes observed by Prudence in herself during 1886 included what she described as improved skin condition, increased energy levels, and enhanced mental clarity that she attributed to the life-extending effects of regular blood consumption. These perceived improvements motivated her to continue and expand her murder operation, while also reinforcing her belief in the validity of her occult theories. The social influence techniques developed by Prudence included methods for manipulating community members through what she believed were supernatural powers gained from blood consumption. These techniques involved subtle psychological manipulation disguised as natural charisma and professional competence, enabling her to maintain community trust while selecting additional victims. The expansion planning conducted by Prudence during late 1886 included preparations for scaling up her murder operation to meet increasing demands for blood, while also exploring possibilities for establishing similar operations in other communities where she could access larger numbers of potential victims. The year 1887 marked the peak of Prudence's killing operation, with systematic murders reaching their highest frequency as she became increasingly confident in her methods, while also experiencing growing appetite for the blood she believed was granting her immortality. The community's continued trust provided her with unlimited access to victims, while sophisticated cover stories concealed the deliberate nature of deaths under her care. The refinement of murder techniques during 1887 included development of more efficient methods for killing mothers and infants while collecting maximum quantities of blood for her immortality rituals. These techniques represented the culmination of years of experimentation and demonstrated Prudence's evolution into one of the most systematic killers in American history. The ritual elaboration that characterized Prudence's blood consumption ceremonies during 1887 reflected her growing sophistication in occult practices and her belief that more complex rituals would enhance the transfer of vital essence from her victims to herself. These ceremonies became increasingly elaborate productions that consumed significant time and resources while providing Prudence with psychological satisfaction beyond simple blood consumption. The community infiltration achieved by Prudence during 1887 included establishment of relationships with influential families and community leaders that provided her with advance information about pregnancies and potential victims, while also creating additional layers of protection from suspicion or investigation. The beginning of the end for Prudence's systematic killing operation came on November 13, 1887, when Elizabeth Crawford's husband, Thomas, returned unexpectedly early from a business trip and interrupted what would have been the murder of both his wife and newborn son. His arrival during the critical moments when Prudence was preparing to kill Elizabeth provided the first direct witness to her criminal activities. Thomas Crawford's observations during his wife's delivery included suspicious activities by Prudence that could not be explained by normal medical procedures. His experience as a businessman had taught him to observe details carefully, and he noticed behavior patterns and equipment that seemed inconsistent with legitimate childbirth assistance. The confrontation between Thomas Crawford and Prudence following Elizabeth's successful delivery marked the first time that someone had directly challenged her medical decisions and demanded explanations for suspicious circumstances observed during childbirth. Prudence's defensive responses and evasive explanations aroused Crawford's suspicions and prompted him to investigate her background and methods. The investigation initiated by Thomas Crawford included systematic examination of death records, interviews with other families who had lost mothers or infants under Prudence's care, and consultation with medical professionals who could evaluate the circumstances surrounding suspicious deaths. This investigation revealed patterns of mortality that exceeded normal expectations, even for the dangerous conditions of 1880s childbirth. The evidence gathered by Crawford's investigation included testimony from families who had observed unusual behavior by Prudence during deliveries, along with medical analysis of death records that showed suspicious clustering of specific types of fatal complications under her care. This evidence provided the foundation for official law enforcement investigation that would eventually expose the full extent of her crimes. The law enforcement investigation that followed Crawford's report was led by Detective Inspector William Hayes, an experienced investigator who had handled several complex criminal cases involving medical professionals. Hayes recognized that Prudence's case represented a new type of criminal enterprise that required specialized knowledge of both medical practices and criminal psychology. The covert investigation of Prudence's activities included surveillance of her house and medical practice, along with undercover operations designed to gather evidence of criminal behavior without alerting her to official interest in her activities. These operations revealed suspicious activities, including unusual nighttime activities at her house and the acquisition of equipment and supplies that appeared inconsistent with normal medical practice. The search warrant executed at Prudence's house in February 1888 revealed physical evidence that confirmed investigators' worst suspicions about the systematic nature of her crimes. The discovery of her underground laboratory, blood processing equipment, and detailed murder records provided definitive proof of systematic killing that had been conducted over nearly 3 years. The evidence recovered during the search included preserved infant blood, ritual equipment, detailed journals documenting murders and blood consumption ceremonies, and personal effects taken from victims as trophies. The scope and systematic nature of this evidence shocked even experienced investigators who had dealt with various forms of criminal behavior. The arrest of Prudence Holloway was conducted with extreme caution due to concerns that she might attempt to escape or destroy additional evidence if she became aware of official interest in her activities. The arrest was coordinated with searches of multiple locations to ensure that all evidence of her crimes would be preserved for prosecution. Prudence's reaction to her arrest demonstrated the extent to which her criminal activities had become integrated into her personal identity and worldview. Rather than expressing surprise or attempting to maintain innocence, she immediately began explaining her actions in terms of the occult theories that had motivated her systematic killing operation. The interrogation of Prudence revealed a woman whose complete abandonment of normal moral constraints had been accompanied by development of elaborate intellectual justifications for systematic murder based on mystical beliefs about immortality and supernatural power. Her detailed confessions provided investigators with comprehensive understanding of her methods and motivations. The trial of Prudence Holloway began in Boston in September 1888 and attracted national attention as prosecutors presented evidence of systematic murder that challenged public understanding of the potential for evil within the medical profession. The case represented one of the first major prosecutions to focus specifically on serial killing motivated by occult beliefs rather than financial gain or personal revenge. The prosecution's case documented 37 murders of mothers and 42 murders of infants, along with evidence of systematic blood collection and consumption rituals that demonstrated the defendant's belief in achieving immortality through cannibalistic practices. The evidence was so extensive and disturbing that many spectators were unable to remain in the courtroom during testimony about Prudence's methods. The defense strategy attempted to argue that Prudence was suffering from mental illness that made her unable to understand the criminal nature of her actions, claiming that her occult beliefs represented delusional thinking rather than deliberate choice to commit murder for personal gain. However, the systematic nature of her crimes and the sophisticated planning evident in her operations contradicted claims of diminished mental capacity. The verdict reached by the jury reflected their horror at the systematic betrayal of trust represented by Prudence's crimes, with guilty verdicts on all counts of murder in the first degree. The judge's sentencing statement emphasized the particular evil of using medical authority to harm the most vulnerable members of society, while their families trusted her with their lives. Prudence Holloway was executed by electric chair on March 15, 1889, becoming one of the first women to be executed using this new method of capital punishment. Her execution was witnessed by medical professionals, law enforcement officials, and representatives of the families whose lives had been destroyed by her systematic killing operation. The impact of Prudence's case on medical practice and public health policy was significant and lasting, leading to improved oversight of medical professionals, better systems for investigating suspicious patterns of patient deaths, and increased awareness of the potential for criminal behavior within trusted professions. The victims of Prudence Holloway deserve to be remembered as individuals whose lives were destroyed by systematic evil that perverted the sacred relationship between healer and patient into an instrument of murder, motivated by delusional beliefs about immortality and supernatural power. The 79 confirmed victims included young mothers who had trusted Prudence to help them safely deliver their children, along with infants whose lives were destroyed before they had opportunities to experience the world beyond their first moments of existence. Each death represented not only individual tragedy, but also devastating losses to families and communities that depended on the courage and hope represented by new life. The legacy of Prudence Holloway's crimes continues to influence medical ethics, patient safety protocols, and public awareness of the importance of maintaining oversight and accountability within healthcare systems that depend on public trust and professional integrity. Her case serves as a permanent reminder that the most sacred relationships in human society can be corrupted by individuals who abandon moral principles in pursuit of personal goals, and that vigilance against such corruption must be maintained through systematic oversight and community involvement in protecting vulnerable populations from exploitation and abuse. The investigation into Prudence's full criminal enterprise revealed evidence that her systematic killing had been far more extensive and sophisticated than initially understood by law enforcement officials. The underground laboratory discovered beneath her house contained not only blood processing equipment, but also detailed experimental records documenting her attempts to refine the life-extending properties of infant blood through various chemical and mystical procedures. The laboratory equipment found in Prudence's basement included sophisticated distillation apparatus, chemical storage systems, and specialized glassware that she had acquired through correspondence with scientific supply companies in Boston and New York. Her orders for these materials, preserved in company records, showed systematic acquisition of equipment over nearly 3 years, demonstrating the premeditated nature of her criminal enterprise. The experimental procedures documented in Prudence's research journals revealed attempts to isolate and concentrate what she believed were the active components of infant blood responsible for transferring vital essence and life force to consumers. These procedures combined legitimate scientific techniques with alchemical traditions dating back centuries, creating hybrid methods that reflected both her medical training and her occult beliefs. The chemical analysis conducted by authorities on samples recovered from Prudence's laboratory revealed the presence of various substances, including mercury, sulfur, and exotic compounds that she had obtained through correspondence with European suppliers who specialized in alchemical materials. These substances were used in complex preparation procedures designed to enhance the mystical properties of collected blood. The preservation techniques employed by Prudence for storing collected blood included methods adapted from both medical preservation practices and ancient alchemical traditions. She had developed systems for maintaining blood samples over extended periods while preventing deterioration that might reduce their perceived magical effectiveness, enabling her to accumulate substantial quantities for use in elaborate consumption rituals. The consumption ceremonies conducted by Prudence were documented in extraordinary detail through journal entries, sketches, and photographic records that revealed the full extent of her psychological investment in achieving immortality through systematic murder. These ceremonies were conducted according to precise schedules coordinated with lunar phases, seasonal changes, and astrological events that she believed would maximize the transfer of vital essence. The ritual equipment discovered in Prudence's ceremonial chambers included chalices made from precious metals, ceremonial knives designed specifically for blood collection, and altar furnishings that created elaborate religious settings for her consumption rituals. These items had been custom manufactured, according to her specifications, and represented substantial financial investment in her criminal activities. The psychological evolution documented in Prudence's journals revealed her gradual transformation from a medical professional who had initially experienced guilt and reluctance about her first murders into an enthusiastic practitioner who viewed systematic killing as her divine mission and primary source of personal fulfillment. The early journal entries from 1885 showed internal conflict and moral struggling as Prudence wrestled with her growing desire to experiment with blood consumption against her professional ethics and social conditioning. However, these conflicts were gradually resolved through elaborate rationalization systems that portrayed her victims as willing participants in mystical processes that gave meaning to their deaths. The philosophical development that accompanied Prudence's psychological transformation included the adoption of complex belief systems that combined elements from various occult traditions, medical theories about life force and vital essence, and personal revelations that she interpreted as divine guidance directing her criminal activities. The social manipulation techniques refined by Prudence over the course of her criminal career included sophisticated methods for managing community relationships while concealing her true nature and criminal activities. She learned to project appropriate emotions during patient interactions, express convincing grief when murders were discovered, and maintain professional relationships that enhanced her credibility while providing access to additional victims. The victim identification and selection process employed by Prudence was based on complex evaluation criteria that considered both practical factors related to the likelihood of detection and mystical beliefs about the quality of vital essence that different types of victims would provide. Her journals contained detailed profiles of potential targets that read like scientific studies combined with occult assessments. The targeting of specific families was based on Prudence's systematic surveillance of community members to identify households where pregnancies were expected and where social dynamics might provide optimal conditions for committing murders without arousing suspicion. She had developed extensive intelligence-gathering networks that provided advance warning about potential opportunities. The seasonal timing of murders was coordinated with both practical considerations about community activities that might affect her ability to commit crimes undetected, and mystical beliefs about times when blood possessed enhanced vital properties. She maintained elaborate calendars that tracked optimal dates for conducting major blood collection ceremonies. The expansion of Prudence's criminal network included recruitment of associates who provided specialized services, including the acquisition of rare alchemical materials, the manufacture of custom ritual equipment, and the disposal of evidence that could not be handled through normal channels. These associates were carefully selected based on their criminal backgrounds and moral flexibility. The recruitment methods employed by Prudence for attracting criminal associates included systematic identification of individuals whose skills, backgrounds, and psychological characteristics made them suitable for participation in various aspects of her murder operation. She had developed sophisticated understanding of criminal psychology that enabled her to identify and manipulate potential accomplices. The management of criminal associates required careful balance between providing sufficient information to enable effective assistance while maintaining operational security that protected Prudence from exposure if any associates were captured or decided to cooperate with authorities. Her organizational skills enabled her to coordinate complex criminal activities across multiple individuals while maintaining strict hierarchical control. The financial operations conducted by Prudence to support her criminal activities included systematic exploitation of her victims' resources, fraudulent business transactions conducted using deceased patients' identities, and investment activities that converted criminal profits into legitimate assets that could support her lifestyle and criminal operations. The property acquisition activities conducted by Prudence using funds obtained through her criminal activities had made her one of the wealthiest individuals in Millbrook, with real estate holdings that included commercial buildings, residential properties, and land investments throughout Massachusetts. These legitimate investments provided cover for her criminal income while generating additional profits. The business relationships maintained by Prudence included partnerships with various commercial enterprises that provided her with income streams independent of her medical practice, while also creating opportunities for money laundering and evidence disposal. These relationships enhanced her social standing while facilitating her criminal activities. The corruption of local officials facilitated by Prudence through systematic bribery and influence operations ensured that her medical practice would not be subjected to unwanted scrutiny, and that any suspicious circumstances surrounding patient deaths would be explained away rather than investigated thoroughly. The intelligence-gathering operations conducted by Prudence's network included surveillance of law enforcement activities, monitoring of community gossip that might indicate growing suspicion about her methods, and infiltration of social organizations that could provide advance warning about threats to her criminal enterprise. The counterintelligence measures employed by Prudence to protect her operations included systematic elimination of potential witnesses, corruption of individuals who might pose threats through blackmail or bribery, and manipulation of community opinion to discredit anyone who might raise questions about her activities. The international connections developed by Prudence through correspondence with occult practitioners and alchemical researchers in Europe provided her with access to specialized knowledge, rare materials, and validation for her beliefs about blood-based immortality treatments. These connections also provided potential escape routes if her criminal activities were discovered. The expansion planning conducted by Prudence during 1887 included detailed preparations for establishing similar murder operations in other communities where she could access larger numbers of potential victims while reducing the risk that patterns of deaths would be noticed in any single location. The proposed expansion would have enabled Prudence to scale up her blood collection activities dramatically, while also reducing her dependence on the relatively small population of Millbrook for providing the quantities of infant blood she believed necessary for achieving true immortality. The sophistication of these plans demonstrated her systematic approach to criminal enterprise development. The training materials prepared by Prudence for potential associates included detailed instructions for victim identification, murder techniques, blood collection procedures, and ritual preparation methods. These materials represented her intention to transmit her specialized knowledge to other individuals who could operate similar enterprises under her supervision. The discovery of expansion plans and training materials elevated Prudence's case from individual serial murder to conspiracy to establish organized criminal activities across multiple locations. The implications of her plans shocked investigators who realized that her capture had potentially prevented the establishment of a network of occult murder operations throughout New England. The psychological evaluation conducted during Prudence's incarceration revealed a complex criminal personality that combined exceptional intelligence and organizational capability with complete abandonment of normal moral constraints in favor of delusional beliefs about achieving supernatural goals through systematic murder. The psychiatric examination conducted by Dr. Margaret Thompson, one of the few women physicians practicing psychiatry in the 1880s, revealed that Prudence possessed characteristics consistent with what would later be recognized as psychopathic personality disorder, combined with elaborate delusional systems that enabled her to rationalize extreme criminal behavior. The theological implications of Prudence's case attracted attention from religious scholars who attempted to understand how an individual could develop belief systems that portrayed systematic murder as spiritually justified while maintaining the intellectual capacity necessary for sophisticated criminal planning and execution. The medical ethics discussions prompted by Prudence's crimes contributed to the development of professional oversight systems, improved training programs for medical practitioners, and better methods for identifying and preventing criminal behavior within trusted professions that provided access to vulnerable populations. The legal precedents established during Prudence's prosecution influenced the development of criminal law regarding systematic murder motivated by occult beliefs, medical malpractice involving deliberate harm to patients, and organized criminal activities that exploited professional authority and community trust. The forensic techniques developed during the investigation of Prudence's crimes became models for law enforcement agencies dealing with similar cases involving systematic murder disguised as medical complications. The methods used to analyze physical evidence, reconstruct criminal activities, and identify patterns of suspicious deaths influenced forensic science development for decades. The victim identification process was complicated by the systematic nature of Prudence's evidence disposal and the passage of time since many of the murders were committed. However, investigators were able to develop techniques for matching fragmentary evidence with missing persons reports and family testimonies that became standard procedures for mass murder investigations. The community healing process that followed the exposure of Prudence's crimes required extensive support services for families who had lost loved ones to her systematic killing, along with community-wide efforts to rebuild trust in medical institutions and restore confidence in the safety of essential healthcare services. The memorial efforts for Prudence's victims included establishment of a cemetery memorial that honored the 79 individuals whose lives had been destroyed by her criminal activities, while also serving as a reminder of the importance of vigilance against exploitation of vulnerable populations by trusted professionals. The educational programs developed in response to Prudence's case included training for medical professionals on ethical standards and professional responsibility, community education about warning signs of medical abuse, and law enforcement training on investigating suspicious patterns of deaths in healthcare settings. The long-term impact of Prudence's crimes on medical practice included implementation of peer review systems, improved patient advocacy programs, and systematic approaches to monitoring healthcare outcomes that reduced opportunities for similar criminal activities to develop and persist without detection. The cultural impact of Prudence's case was reflected in literature, journalism, and popular entertainment that portrayed her crimes as cautionary examples of how trusted authority figures could exploit their positions for criminal purposes. These cultural productions emphasized the importance of maintaining oversight and accountability within essential social institutions. The influence of Prudence's case on women's roles in medicine was complex, as her crimes challenged assumptions about feminine nature and caregiving, while also demonstrating that women could be capable of systematic violence that exceeded male criminal behavior in sophistication and scope. Her case contributed to discussions about gender, authority, and moral responsibility that influenced professional development for generations. The international attention attracted by Prudence's case contributed to improved cooperation between law enforcement agencies in different countries, as investigators recognized that sophisticated criminals could exploit international boundaries and communication difficulties to avoid detection and prosecution. The research applications of evidence preserved from Prudence's case enabled ongoing study of criminal psychology, medical ethics, and the social conditions that enable systematic criminal behavior to develop within trusted professions. Her case became a standard reference for researchers studying serial murder, medical abuse, and occult-motivated crime. The policy reforms implemented in response to Prudence's crimes included improved oversight of medical professionals, better systems for tracking and investigating suspicious patterns of patient deaths, and enhanced coordination between medical institutions and law enforcement agencies for identifying and preventing healthcare-related criminal activity. The technological innovations developed for investigating Prudence's case included improved methods for chemical analysis of evidence, better techniques for preserving and examining historical documents, and enhanced communication systems that enabled more effective coordination between different law enforcement agencies and jurisdictions. The philosophical discussions prompted by Prudence's case contributed to evolving understanding of evil, moral development, and the factors that enable individuals to abandon ethical principles in favor of criminal behavior, motivated by delusional beliefs about supernatural goals and personal transformation. In remembering the 79 victims of Prudence Holloway's systematic killing operation, we honor not only their individual lives, but also their roles as catalysts for reforms that improved medical safety and professional accountability throughout American healthcare systems. Sarah Mitchell, the schoolteacher whose murder marked the beginning of Prudence's systematic killing spree, represented the trust that young families placed in medical professionals during the most vulnerable moments of their lives. Her death and the deaths of her infant son demonstrated how that trust could be exploited by individuals who viewed patients as resources rather than human beings deserving of care and protection. The 36 other mothers who died under Prudence's care were women whose hopes for safe delivery and healthy children were destroyed by a predator who exploited their dependence on medical expertise during childbirth. Each death represented not only individual tragedy, but also devastating losses to families and communities that depended on successful reproduction for their continued growth and prosperity. The 42 infants who were murdered by Prudence never had opportunities to experience life beyond their first moments, their potential contributions to society eliminated by systematic evil that viewed them as nothing more than sources of blood for occult experimentation. Their deaths represent perhaps the most profound violation of the medical profession's fundamental commitment to protecting and preserving human life. The families of Prudence's victims suffered not only the immediate trauma of losing loved ones, but also the additional psychological damage of learning that their deaths had been deliberately caused by the very person they had trusted to provide medical care and protection during childbirth. The betrayal of trust, represented by Prudence's crimes, created lasting trauma that affected multiple generations. The community of Millbrook was forever changed by the revelation that systematic evil had flourished in their midst for nearly 3 years while disguised as charitable medical service. The knowledge that their most trusted medical professional had been systematically murdering the most vulnerable members of their community challenged fundamental assumptions about safety, trust, and the reliability of social institutions. The legacy of Prudence Holloway's crimes continues to influence medical practice, patient safety protocols, and public awareness of the importance of maintaining oversight and accountability within healthcare systems that depend on public trust and professional integrity. Her case serves as a permanent reminder that even the most sacred relationships can be corrupted by individuals who abandon moral principles in pursuit of personal goals. The story of Prudence Holloway demonstrates how quickly trust can be destroyed and how difficult it can be to rebuild confidence in essential social institutions after systematic betrayal by trusted authority figures. Her case illustrates the importance of maintaining vigilance against exploitation and abuse, while also recognizing the vulnerability of systems that depend on trust and professional competence for their effectiveness. In the end, the macabre history of Prudence Holloway serves as both a historical account of systematic medical abuse and a cautionary tale about the eternal need for vigilance against those who would exploit trust and authority for criminal purposes. Her 79 victims did not die in vain if their sacrifice leads to better protection for vulnerable populations and improved oversight of the professionals entrusted with their care. The memory of the midwife feared by every mother reminds us that the most dangerous predators are often those who appear most helpful and trustworthy, and that our responsibility to protect the innocent requires not only charitable care, but also the systematic vigilance necessary to identify and stop those who would transform healing into harm and medical authority into instruments of death. The deeper investigation into Prudence's methodologies revealed sophisticated techniques that went far beyond simple blood collection to encompass elaborate systems for victim preparation, ritualistic murder, and mystical transformation of human life force into what she believed were immortality-granting substances. Her basement laboratory contained equipment that represented a fusion of legitimate medical science with centuries-old alchemical traditions. The victim preparation protocols developed by Prudence included systematic weakening of mothers through carefully administered toxins that would make them more susceptible to blood loss during delivery, while creating symptoms that appeared consistent with normal pregnancy complications. These toxins were introduced through herbal remedies and nutritional supplements that she prescribed during prenatal visits. The psychological conditioning techniques employed by Prudence during prenatal care included subtle manipulation designed to increase patients' dependence on her medical authority while reducing their likelihood of questioning unusual procedures or seeking second opinions. She created atmospheres of trust and gratitude that made patients more compliant during the critical moments when she would implement her murder plans. The timing calculations that governed Prudence's murder schedule were based on complex astrological charts and lunar calendars that she believed determined when blood would possess optimal vital properties for transfer to consumers. Her journals contained elaborate astronomical calculations coordinated with victim selection to ensure that murders were committed during periods of maximum mystical effectiveness. The blood purification procedures conducted in Prudence's laboratory involved multiple stages of chemical processing, designed to separate and concentrate what she believed were the active components responsible for life extension and supernatural power acquisition. These procedures combined distillation, crystallization, and fermentation techniques adapted from both medical chemistry and ancient alchemical traditions. The consumption ceremonies performed by Prudence following successful blood collection were elaborate theatrical productions that lasted for hours and incorporated music, incantations, costume changes, and precisely choreographed movements that she believed were necessary for proper absorption of vital essence. These ceremonies were conducted in underground chambers decorated with occult symbols and ritual objects. The equipment maintenance protocols developed by Prudence for preserving her chemical apparatus and ritual implements demonstrated her systematic approach to sustaining her criminal enterprise over extended periods. She maintained detailed schedules for cleaning, calibrating and replacing equipment, while also developing backup systems that would enable continuation of operations if primary equipment was damaged or destroyed. The supplier relationships established by Prudence for obtaining rare chemicals and alchemical materials involved correspondence with specialized vendors throughout the United States and Europe. These relationships required careful management to avoid arousing suspicion about her unusual requirements, while ensuring reliable access to materials essential for her blood processing procedures. The quality control systems implemented by Prudence for evaluating the effectiveness of different blood preparation methods included systematic testing of various processing techniques to determine which approaches produced substances with the greatest perceived life-extending properties. Her experimental records documented hundreds of individual procedures with detailed observations about their apparent effectiveness. The storage and inventory management systems developed by Prudence for maintaining her supply of processed blood products involved sophisticated preservation techniques and organizational methods that enabled her to maintain substantial quantities of prepared substances while preventing deterioration that might reduce their perceived mystical effectiveness. The distribution planning conducted by Prudence included preparations for sharing processed blood products with other occult practitioners who might be interested in achieving immortality through similar methods. These plans involved developing secure shipping procedures and establishing communication networks with potential customers throughout the occult underground. The documentation systems maintained by Prudence included not only detailed murder records and experimental data, but also extensive photographic documentation of her victims, procedures, and results. These photographs provided visual records that enabled her to analyze her techniques, while also serving as trophies that commemorated successful blood collection ceremonies. The security measures implemented by Prudence for protecting her criminal operations included elaborate early warning systems, hidden escape routes, and evidence destruction procedures that could be activated quickly if her activities were discovered by authorities. These measures demonstrated her understanding of the risks involved in her criminal enterprise and her preparation for potential exposure. The recruitment strategies employed by Prudence for identifying potential accomplices included systematic evaluation of community members to identify individuals whose criminal backgrounds, financial difficulties, or occult interests might make them susceptible to involvement in her murder operation. Her recruitment efforts targeted specific personality types that she believed would be most useful for different aspects of her criminal activities. The training programs developed by Prudence for educating criminal accomplices included detailed instruction in victim selection, murder techniques, blood collection procedures, laboratory operations, and security protocols. These programs were designed to enable accomplices to operate independently while maintaining the quality standards necessary for successful blood processing. The compensation systems established by Prudence for rewarding criminal accomplices included both financial payments and shares of processed blood products that could be used by accomplices for their own immortality experiments. These compensation arrangements were designed to maintain loyalty while also reducing the financial burden of maintaining a criminal organization. The operational expansion plans developed by Prudence during 1887 included detailed proposals for establishing similar murder operations in Boston, Providence, and Hartford, where larger populations would provide access to greater numbers of potential victims, while sophisticated urban environments would offer better cover for criminal activities. The franchise development concepts explored by Prudence included systems for training and supervising other individuals who could establish independent murder operations under her guidance and oversight. These concepts represented her vision of transforming individual criminal enterprise into organized network of occult practitioners pursuing immortality through systematic murder. The market analysis conducted by Prudence for evaluating expansion opportunities included assessment of demographic factors, medical infrastructure, law enforcement capabilities, and occult community presence in various cities throughout New England. This analysis demonstrated her systematic approach to criminal enterprise development and her understanding of factors that influenced operational success. The financial projections prepared by Prudence for supporting expansion activities included estimates of startup costs, operational expenses, and revenue potential for murder operations in different geographic markets. These projections treated systematic killing as a legitimate business opportunity that could be evaluated using standard commercial analysis techniques. The risk assessment procedures developed by Prudence for evaluating threats to her criminal operations included systematic monitoring of law enforcement activities, community gossip, and changes in medical practice that might affect her ability to commit murders without detection. These assessments enabled her to modify her operations proactively to address emerging threats. The counterintelligence operations conducted by Prudence included systematic efforts to identify and neutralize potential threats through bribery, blackmail, intimidation, and, when necessary, murder of individuals who posed risks to her criminal enterprise. These operations demonstrated her willingness to eliminate any obstacles to achieving her goals of immortality and supernatural power. The international coordination activities pursued by Prudence included correspondence with occult practitioners in London, Paris, and Vienna who were conducting similar experiments with blood-based immortality treatments. These communications provided her with access to advanced techniques and theoretical frameworks that enhanced her own criminal methodologies. The research collaboration projects developed by Prudence included sharing experimental data and processed blood samples with other researchers who were investigating mystical approaches to achieving immortality and supernatural abilities. These collaborations represented efforts to accelerate progress toward her ultimate goals through cooperative research and development. The publication plans considered by Prudence included preparation of detailed treatises describing her methods and results that could be circulated within occult communities to advance general understanding of blood-based immortality techniques. These publications would have established her as a leading authority in the field, while also providing instruction for other practitioners. The legacy planning conducted by Prudence included provisions for preserving her research data, continuing her experimental programs, and maintaining her criminal organization in the event of her death or capture. These plans demonstrated her commitment to ensuring that her work would continue, even if she personally was unable to pursue her goals of achieving immortality. The psychological impact assessment of Prudence's crimes on surviving family members revealed devastating and long-lasting trauma that extended far beyond immediate grief to include complex psychological responses to learning that trusted medical professional had systematically murdered their loved ones. Many family members required extensive psychiatric treatment to address the trauma of betrayed trust. The community social dynamics following exposure of Prudence's crimes included dramatic changes in relationships between residents, medical professionals, and authority figures as community members struggled to rebuild trust in essential social institutions while also processing the knowledge that systematic evil had flourished among them for years without detection. The economic impact of Prudence's crimes on the Millbrook community included significant disruption of normal business activities as residents became reluctant to engage with medical professionals or other service providers who had been associated with Prudence or who had failed to detect her criminal activities, despite having opportunities to observe suspicious circumstances. The religious and spiritual responses to Prudence's crimes included extensive soul-searching within local churches about how evil could flourish within their community, while also prompting theological discussions about the nature of evil, divine justice, and the responsibility of believers to protect vulnerable members of society from exploitation and abuse. The medical professional responses to Prudence's case included extensive reforms in training, oversight, and peer review systems designed to prevent similar criminal behavior from developing within trusted medical professions. These reforms influenced medical education and practice throughout New England, and eventually became standard practices nationwide. The law enforcement responses to Prudence's case included development of specialized investigation techniques for healthcare-related crimes, improved coordination between different agencies for investigating suspicious patterns of deaths, and enhanced training programs for officers who might encounter similar criminal enterprises in the future. The academic research responses to Prudence's case included extensive study of her methods, motivations, and psychological characteristics by researchers in fields including criminal psychology, medical ethics, occult studies, and social dynamics. Her case became a standard reference for understanding systematic criminal behavior within trusted professions. The legislative responses to Prudence's crimes included passage of laws strengthening oversight of medical professionals, improving reporting requirements for suspicious deaths, and enhancing penalties for healthcare-related crimes. These legal reforms provided better protection for vulnerable populations while also establishing clearer accountability standards for medical practitioners. The cultural production responses to Prudence's case included numerous books, articles, plays, and other creative works that attempted to understand and interpret the significance of systematic murder committed under the guise of medical care. These productions contributed to public awareness while also providing artistic frameworks for processing the horror of betrayed trust. The international attention attracted by Prudence's case included correspondence from researchers and law enforcement officials in Europe who were dealing with similar criminal activities involving occult practitioners and medical professionals. This international interest led to improved cooperation and information sharing that enhanced investigation capabilities worldwide. The technological innovation responses to Prudence's case included development of improved methods for chemical analysis of evidence, better techniques for preserving and examining historical documents, and enhanced communication systems that enabled more effective coordination between different law enforcement agencies and medical institutions. The educational program development resulting from Prudence's case included training curricula for medical students, law enforcement officers, and community leaders that used her crimes as examples of how systematic criminal behavior could develop within trusted professions and how such behavior could be detected and prevented through appropriate oversight and vigilance. The memorial and commemoration efforts for Prudence's victims included establishment of permanent markers, annual remembrance ceremonies, and educational displays that honored the 79 individuals whose lives were destroyed by her systematic killing, while also serving as reminders of the importance of protecting vulnerable populations from exploitation by trusted professionals. In the final analysis, the macabre history of Prudence Holloway represents one of the most systematic and calculated betrayals of professional trust in American medical history, demonstrating how individual criminal behavior could exploit essential social institutions while causing devastation that extended far beyond immediate victims to affect entire communities for generations. The 79 victims of Prudence's systematic killing operation deserve to be remembered not as statistics in a criminal case, but as individuals whose trust in medical authority was exploited by a predator who viewed them as resources for achieving personal goals rather than human beings deserving of care and protection during their most vulnerable moments. Their deaths catalyzed reforms that improved medical safety, enhanced professional oversight, and increased public awareness of the need for vigilance against exploitation of vulnerable populations by individuals in positions of authority and trust. The legacy of their sacrifice continues to protect others through the systems and awareness that developed in response to the horror of their systematic murder. The story of Prudence Holloway serves as an eternal reminder that evil can flourish within the most trusted and essential social institutions when oversight fails and communities become complacent about protecting their most vulnerable members. Her case demonstrates that the price of safety is eternal vigilance, and that our responsibility to protect the innocent extends beyond individual charity to include systematic efforts to maintain accountability and transparency within institutions that serve vulnerable populations. The midwife feared by every mother has passed into history, but the lessons of her crimes continue to influence how we protect those who depend on medical authority for their lives and well-being, ensuring that the sacred trust between healer and patient is never again corrupted by individuals who would transform the power to heal into the power to destroy.